Right now, our player can only fire kunai left and right, because the shooting direction is based on whether the sprite is flipped. But in a real Survivors or Vampire Survivors style game, we want the player to be able to shoot in all directions: up, down, left, right, and diagonally down, diagonally, and anywhere on the 360 circle. So let's upgrade our shooting system to do exactly that. The easiest and cleanest way to do this is to use the movement direction of the player. If the player is moving up, they shoot up. If they move down, they shoot down. If they move diagonally, the kunai will also fire diagonally. We'll start by adding a new variable inside our player movement script to store the last movement direction. Anytime the player presses a movement key, we save the direction they are moving in. And if the player stops moving, we keep the last known direction, so the player still shoots even when standing still. Now in the player shooting script, instead of checking if the sprite is flipped, we grab the movement direction from the player movement script. If the last direction is 0, meaning the player hasn't moved yet, we'll just default to firing to the right. With this change, our kunai can now fire in every direction depending on where the player is moving. Let's test it. If I move up, the kunai goes straight up. If I move down, it shoots down. Left and right still work. And diagonal movement creates diagonal shots, just like in a real Survivors.io style game. This adds a lot more dynamism to the gameplay and makes the combat feel much more alive. Now that our player can shoot in 360 degrees, it's time to bring some life into the scene. Let's create our very first enemy. Inside the hierarchy, I'll right-click, go to 2D Object, Sprite, and choose a simple shape. For now, a square or circle is perfectly fine as a placeholder. I'll rename this object to Enemy, because this will be our base enemy that we'll build on in the next episodes. Before we move forward, we need to give this enemy a new tag so our scripts can find it later. So with the enemy selected, I'll go to the top of the inspector where it says Tag, click it, and choose Add Tag. I'll create a new tag called Enemy. All uppercase or lowercase doesn't matter, as long as you're consistent. Now I select the enemy object again, open the tag dropdown, and assign it the new enemy tag. Perfect. We now have a basic enemy object in the scene, and it's tagged correctly, so our shooting system and upcoming enemy logic can detect it. Right now, our player shoots all the time, but that's not how Survivors.io works. We only want the player to shoot when an enemy is nearby. So let's add a detection radius around the player. First, I'll create a new variable called detection radius. This will control how close an enemy needs to be for the player to fire a kunai. Next, I'm updating the getNearestEnemy function. Instead of scanning the entire map, I limit the search to only enemies that are within this radius. If no enemy is close enough, the function simply returns null. Now, inside update, before the player shoots, I check. Is there an enemy inside my radius? If not, the player just waits. If yes, the attack activates automatically. And that's it. The player now reacts only when danger is near. Let's test it. If I bring an enemy close to the player, the kunai starts firing. If the enemy moves out of range, the shooting stops. This feels a lot more polished and much closer to real Survivors.io behavior. Right now, our kunai shoots in the correct direction, but it's not smart. It doesn't actually focus on enemies like in Survivors.io. So let's upgrade it and turn it into a real homing kunai. First, when we spawn a kunai, we look for the nearest enemy and give that enemy as the kunai's target. Then inside the kunai script, instead of just flying forward, the kunai constantly recalculates its direction toward the target. We smoothly rotate the kunai using Quaternion rotate towards, and then move it forward in the direction it's facing. This means the kunai now tracks the enemy in real time. If the enemy moves, the kunai turns and follows it. Let's press play. Perfect. The kunai now intelligently focuses on enemies, rotates toward them, and chases them just like a guided projectile in survivors.io. Much better than before. Now that the kunai can follow the enemy, we want it to disappear when it actually hits the target. To do that, I'll add an onTriggerEnter 2D function. If the kunai collides with something tagged as enemy, we simply destroy the kunai. Make sure the kunai has a Collider 2D set to trigger, and the enemy has a normal Collider 2D. And that's it. Let's test it. When the kunai touches the enemy, perfect, it gets destroyed immediately. This makes the weapon system feel much more responsive and polished. Our kunai is rotating toward the enemy, but the head still doesn't visually touch the target. This happens because the sprite isn't aligned with Unity's default forward direction. Unity expects projectiles to point to the right, but my kunai sprite was drawn pointing up. So even though the rotation is correct mathematically, visually it looks wrong. To fix this, I simply open the kunai prefab and rotate the sprite renderer so that the kunai points to the right at rotation 0. Now, when the script rotates the kunai and moves it forward using space.self, the head of the kunai correctly faces the enemy and hits them perfectly. Let's test it. Perfect. Now the kunai head touches the enemy exactly as it should. If you're enjoying this series and you're learning something new, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming. Enemies, waves, upgrades, boss fights, and full survivors.io gameplay. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's keep building this game together.